Hello, everyone. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast here. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katie Burke, and I'm the Government Program Strategist at Laserfiche. Today I'm joined by Sharon Hayes, Director of Public Sector at DocuSign. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few logistical items. First, if you have any technical questions related to WebEx, please type those in the chat pane in the middle right-hand pane of your screen. If you have any questions for our panelists or moderator, please type those in the Q&A box in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. This way we can ensure that everybody sees your questions. Also, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar with everyone who registered. We'll send it out via email to the email address you provided in the registration form. We'll send it out as soon as it becomes available. So the goal of today's webinar is to foster a discussion about how we can achieve and improve digital government. The concept of digital government isn't new. It's been around for over 20 years now. And, we've all heard the benefits of digital government: cost savings, increased efficiency, and better service delivery. Yet many government organizations continue to find themselves pushing paper as part of their standard processes. So what's the holdup? Well, for some, going digital can feel more like a revolution than an evolution of business processes. It can be difficult to manage the people, the processes, and the products that are involved with becoming a fully digital agency. However, digital government is an urgent and pressing initiative. Today, we're in a world of tweets, texts, and tablets, and digital government is constantly changing. The longer we wait, the more difficult it becomes to close the IT gap between the public and private sectors. I think President Obama summed up the urgency of digital government well when he released the federal government's Digital Government Strategy memo back in 2012. He said, ultimately, digital government strategy will ensure that agencies use emerging technologies to serve the public as effectively as possible. As a government and as a trusted provider of services, we must never forget who our customers are: the American people. And while there are many resources available on best practices for going digital, oftentimes it's most helpful to hear directly from your peers on their successes and the advice that they have. Both DocuSign and Laserfiche have been fortunate to work with leaders in digital government, and so we've invited a few experts to share their thoughts on today's webinar. Today we'll be asking our panelists questions about three critical components of going digital: the benefits and results achieved from business process automation, change management, and eliminating barriers to moving forward in a digital space, and driving digital government by encouraging innovation. Then we'll leave 20 minutes for a live question and answer session from the audience. Again, as a reminder, if you have a question for the panelists, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We'll go through as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, it's my honor to introduce the esteemed panel of digital government experts on today's webinar. First, Dr. Robert Sobie is the Director of Information Systems at Eaton County, Michigan. Eaton County and Dr. Sobie were actually awarded earlier this month with the Center for Digital Government's prestigious Top Digital Counties Award. During his 30-year career in county government, Robert Sobie has received several IT and public administration awards in leadership, innovation, and partnership. Sobie also serves as an instructor of public administration in the School of Public Affairs and Administration at Western Michigan University. He has contributed to the International Journal of Technology, Knowledge, and Society, as well as to national and regional news outlets on the topic of website accessibility. We're happy to have you, Bob.
Thank you.
Second, we have Dr. Catherine Kunst. She's the Director of Operations at the Colorado Statewide Internet Portal Authority, or SIPA. As Director of Operations for SIPA, Catherine works to make it easier for the public to access state and local government information, products, and services. Catherine is also the founder of Icarus Rising, a consulting business that supports early-stage technology companies, and co-founder of Beacon Biotechnology, a developer of novel diagnostic microarray devices. Thanks for joining us, Catherine.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
Our third panelist today is Jack Miles. Jack is a business operations leader with over 30 years of experience transforming corporate services, administration, and sourcing organizations in leading North American firms and government. He serves on the advisory council of DocuSign, MDT Holdings, People Ticker, Clear Village, Geocode, the Visionaries Council of Coupa Software, and is a mentor at Starter Studio in Orlando, Florida. Miles is also the former Secretary of State for the state of Florida's Department of Management Services. Thanks for being here, Jack.
Thank you very much for having me.
And Sharon Hayes, the Director of Public Sector at DocuSign, will be moderating our panel discussion. I'm thrilled to have partnered with her on this event. At DocuSign, Sharon leads the business development in the state and local government vertical and helps state and local government leaders with business analysis, use cases for digital signatures, and evaluating the benefits to be received from going digital. Prior to DocuSign, Sharon spent many years in state government, including her time as Deputy CIO and the Director of E-commerce Initiatives at the state of North Carolina. Her passion for improving government services really is contagious, and so it's truly been my pleasure to work with her on this event. Thanks so much, Sharon.
Thank you, Katie.
All right, at this point, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Sharon, to get our discussion started.
Sounds wonderful. Thanks to all of you who are joining us this afternoon. And as she mentioned, I'm so excited anytime we talk about digitizing government. After 25 years in government and many mountains of paper, this is one of my passions, and I'm so excited to have these great panelists with us today. So with that, we'll get started. And we'll start with a discussion that's at the heart of digital government operations strategy, business process automation. Going digital involves moving business processes into an electronic automated state. Let's examine the importance and benefits of digital business processes. So our first set of questions for our panelists is, what are some specific benefits you've seen as a result of automating business processes? Have you calculated a return on investment for going digital? Did you see these as hard dollar savings? And if so, were you able to reinvest your savings? So with that, Jack, how about start us off?
Sure. First of all, thanks everybody for coming into the call. I mean, there's huge opportunities, obviously, in government for digital signature, and as things as basic as fundamental as just the approval of new certifications and licenses and things like that. When you look at the amount of time that some of these things takes a phenomenal amount of time to approve them and get them, and also the processing that takes place in electronic mail rooms, if in fact some of the states have them. The straight-through processing that can be done with electronic signature, digital signature, digitizing the documents is truly outstanding. And the big challenge is the getting better service for the constituents that are out there. So being able to make timeline commitments and saying from the time something is submitted till the time you get something back in return, or you get your license or whatever, is X amount of time, and measure against that. Going completely digital streamlines that process dramatically. And frankly, if you start to take a look at state government, I mean, a big part of this obviously is regulation, but another big component is also, the fees generated by this, and the ability to be able to speed that process up and make people feel good about the process is pretty important.
Great, thank you, Jack. Catherine, we'll go to you next.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. I'll say for me, I guess I'll start and layer off of what Jack said. For me, the thing I love about specifically electronic signature is the audit trail functionality. So SIPA does a lot of multi-party contracts, and historically those would come in by paper, and sometimes we would have 2 of 5 signatures, and we could never, in fact, track down a fully executed version of the contract, although we were moving forward and committing funds for those contracts, because we knew somewhere someone had the fully executed version. And so now, by switching to an electronic signature platform, we've completely abolished that. We know who signed it when, where they were geographically, and I find that sort of tracking to be fantastic. And for us, it spreads across everything that we offer. So SIPA is basically a procurement mechanism for any state or local government within Colorado, and we provide exclusively cloud-based services, whether it's email, whether it's CRM, whether it's electronic content management. We've just added telephony. We're building a learning portal. So anything that can live in the cloud, we can aggregate those services to save governments money. And we have done a little bit of calculation on ROI for two of our services, one of which is we host over 300 independent government websites for different governments, whether you're a fire district or a state agency, on our colorado.gov portal. And we don't charge the governments for that service. And so we estimate for that service and then payment processing, which we offer to about 150 different governments in Colorado, we're saving governments about $6 million a year just on either the hosting costs or the administration or staying PCI compliant. And so we're really delighted to be able to spread those dollars back through the state.
Right,
but I don't know how the governments reinvest their savings.
Okay. Well, maybe, Bob, we'll move on to you, and maybe you can add some interesting comments there.
Okay, thank you. When we think about business process automation, I always think of that phrase that we see in the media today, and that's doing more with less. But I think the problem with that phrase is it doesn't quite emphasize the need to transform our business processes from the way they are today to the way they need to be in order to meet the needs of our constituents and such. So in terms of internal, business process analyses that we've been engaging in here in the county, we have seen some significant return on investments with just a couple of our initiatives that have been ongoing here for a while. So this idea of paperless case management, for instance, within our court system, that particular process we started over a decade ago, and annually we're showing, some savings in the neighborhood of about $39,000 a year by eliminating the use of consumable products, primarily, like paper and ink and toner and that sort of thing, as well as the special filing systems that court operations tend to use. So those are very hard dollars that we see taken out of the budget. I think there are some soft costs as well that we recognize in terms of keeping staffing levels at the current level. So even though a department may be interested in adding a position for various reasons, if those can be kept out of the budget, I think that at some point we need to factor that in as well. And then with regards to retaining any of these savings, departments where we have been successful in calculating a meaningful ROI, those departments then advocate for reusing that money for other purposes, usually technology. And they receive considerable attention when they make those requests because they are demonstrating that they're an innovative thinking department. As it relates to my IT operation, I'm fortunate that if I can generate savings in working in partnership with some of the other county departments or courts, that I can retain that in my capital fund and use that to reinvest in other technologies or expanding the use of technologies and such. So there's another example that we have regarding our bill paying process, what everyone probably knows as accounts payable. And we've seen a significant return on investment there as well. That recent calculations show that we're saving about $51,000 a year in both hard and soft costs. So we think that that's significant, but I would emphasize that business process improvement, redesign, automation, it can take time, and we need people within the organization who are capable of critically thinking about their business processes in order to dissect them, to make them better.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Very interesting conversation there, Katie. It's interesting that each of you at one stage or another mentioned payment processing. So again, e-commerce background, very important. Not only does it make it better for our constituents, but as you said, Jack, it brings the monies in if we need them for our fees faster. So again, another piece of digital government. So very excited about what we're hearing and seeing here. Katie, shall we move on to our next question for the panelists? Today we're going to talk about, like we said, we've heard our panelists, they've done a great job of illustrating how business process automation results in process improvements and efficiency. But oftentimes policy and getting stakeholders on board can create a challenge for executing on these ideas. Now let's look at how we can manage the process of changing to a digital environment. Our questions are, if we know that technologies are more efficient and delight customers, what is the logjam for moving forward? What's the best way to get buy-in for digital initiatives from other stakeholders, such as department heads or elected officials? Can policy influence technology, or does technology influence policy? Bob, how about start us on this one?
Sure. Well, with regards to the logjam, I think there can be both legislative and or institutional barriers that might prevent, and I can only speak really for local government given my experience, prevent us from making quantum leaps in the manner and method in which we transform our business processes. So those barriers can take time to deal with. One in particular here in Michigan, something known as the Records Media Act, that was a decades-long attempt to allow courts to store as an official record their documents in an electronic or digital format. That has just recently changed earlier this year, in which courts are no longer required to maintain court records in a paper format. So it's very liberating, I think, for them, and provides an opportunity for us to become more digital in that particular area. But I also think it's important to recognize the organizational culture overall that might exist, whether that's individuals or groups of individuals who are in centers of power within the organization, that we need to work on those individuals as well in order to ensure that the right attitude exists about engaging in various forms of change. Because I think we can all recognize that, you know, the status quo methods of government really need to change, and we're well beyond the need for change. But many times, you know, we may have some institutional issues that we need to deal with, including individuals, and I just think it's part of the process of going through and implementing changes. In terms of approaches that I've used that have been really successful, I've used internal champions to help advance some of the IT ideas or initiatives that we have underway. Sometimes IT leadership alone is not enough to convince or to sell stakeholders that we need to make some changes. Sometimes we need others. So I can tell you I have a chief judge in the court system who's very innovative in terms of his thinking, the county administrator who oversees general government the same way, and other individuals. So I look to partner with them, to collaborate with them on initiatives, and you know, try and move things forward. I like to describe this in a way as, you know, making ripples before making waves, that we can start with some proof of concept projects to show the benefits, because seeing truly is believing, but use those proof of concepts, pilot projects if you prefer, and really work on those. They don't have to be very costly. You can use trial versions of software. You can negotiate opportunities with vendors for trial periods and such. So both of those methods, I think, have worked for me. And then regarding policy and technology, I think it's cyclical. I think that technologies can actually reveal opportunities in which we can improve government that require policy changes. And then through various policy changes that may occur, it can trigger the use of new technologies. So I think it's very cyclical.
Thank you, Bob. Jack, how about your thoughts on change management?
Well, Bob raised some interesting and very appropriate comments. I think, you know, the process change is always a big one. It's a matter of sometimes changing systems, sometimes changing you know, business processes, et cetera. And despite what people typically will say is that they like change, the reality is they don't. There's also dollar signs associated with some of the changes, and many times what's looked at in organizations is the price versus the cost and the overall value that would be delivered. So that's a big piece to look at. I think the concept though of getting sponsors or a champion in state government to advance this is something that's absolutely critical. You find one or two players to embrace it and move forward, and then what it'll create is a dynamic within state government to say, well, why aren't we doing that? The other challenge is that it allows, I think, longer term, some of the existing functions to potentially go away. And if that's something that could possibly happen, so let's say there's a lot of transactions that are coming in paper format because they require wet signature, and they could in theory be digital if in fact you went to electronic signature. Mailrooms and scanning and all of the other things that exist could in fact go away, and that presents another dynamic and possible resistance point to change. But the reality is it's going to happen, it's going to come, and it's just a matter of when it's going to begin and how quickly it's going to be embraced in organizations.
Great, thank you, Jack. Catherine?
So I have to 100% agree with both Bob and Jack just in terms of the change management process that involves the human beings is almost always the hardest part. So I think we as customers of our governments, we want government to be Amazon, right? You go to the website, you click the button, it's so easy. And I'll say my organization is really trying hard to make it easier for citizens to get access to their government services. But from our side, it seems like every government is at a different stage. So we've got smaller governments where for them just getting a website launched is a huge innovation. And then if we can help them get a scanner to just upload some files so that citizens can do their own record searches, it's a tremendous change for them, where our bigger state agencies have had that capability for years. We're starting to be pretty creative to help underwrite some of the proof of concept development so there's less risk to governments, where our organization, because it's self-funded, can sometimes pay for prototype development and then share that cost as governments adopt a new service. But there's not that many organizations like us, so it can be very risky, I think, for a bigger city or county or state agency to make a big change. I know you had that experience helping North Carolina roll out DocuSign statewide, and just reading through your 3 or 4 years of meeting reports of how you did that was incredible, of just the process that's needed to bring everybody up to speed and get them involved in making that change.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Again, it is interesting that we do know that we have people at all levels of digitization, so to speak. And I believe we are seeing more and more, though, as we're talking about here, the interest and all of us knowing that that's the way we have to go, because that's what our constituents are going to demand from us. So, Katie, with that, we'll move on to our last area of questions for the panelists. So we talked about in our last session and our panelists that, again, that especially our constituents are the heart of what drive our strategy. Looking internally within your organization, there are many individuals that are committed to citizen service and a better government organization. Again, work with a lot of great people in state government who very much care about how we serve our constituents. So the question then becomes, how can you harness the ideas of your staff and drive towards digital government targets by encouraging innovation? So how do you encourage innovation among your staff? How can you create a culture of innovation? And does government provide incentives for innovation? If not, what could some incentives look like? So Catherine, let's start off with you.
Thanks, Sharon. So one of my favorite programs that promotes government innovation is run by a nonprofit group called Florida Tax Watch. So this is just a state of Florida-based program. And every year they give out an award called the Prudential Davis Productivity Award. And it's for innovative individuals at some level of government who've created efficiency that saved their organization money or time or number of people needed to do a project. And unfortunately, governments aren't really good at or generally allowed to compensate superachieving staff with bonuses or financial incentives. And so I think the public recognition from this type of award is really helpful. So I think those of us that get involved in government, we're pretty service-driven anyway, but it's nice to get a little bit of accolade, even if it's not financial. On the other side, SIPAS tries through our annual grant program to seed innovative projects. And so we review about 100 applications a year. We give out maybe 20, and we hope that we're allowing smaller governments and state agencies to be pretty creative. But I'm sure there's many better ways to, or many ways that we could improve innovation in government.
Thank you, Catherine. Jack? Jack, are you able to hear me?
I'm here. I'm sorry. For some reason, the phone seemed to be on mute. Catherine, thank you very much for calling out Florida Tax Watch. I'm actually on the board of trustees of Florida Tax Watch, and I was secretary of Department of Management Services. Our agency won several awards, and I really need to echo the fact that just the recognition that people get from something like that drives a tremendous amount of thought process and really thinking about different ways to do things and innovation. So, and I think, people in state government, it's amazing to me, having come from the corporate world into state government, the fact that people are so dedicated, and with a lot of the drivers that we have in the corporate environment, compensation variations as well as stock options and things like that, the way people get motivated to do the job. I mean, the key in all of this, though, is to find those change agents and those people that are really thinking about doing things differently, and creating an environment where some of this can be tried and piloted and done in a way that's not going to be problematic if it doesn't exactly meet all of the objectives right out of the box. I found sometimes that government really waits a long time to do things, and then when they do it, they expect almost immediate results without any bumps in the road. And the reality is that any of these issues, any of these changes, any innovation, there's going to be some challenges and there's going to be some hiccups, and they really need to be tolerated as part of the process.
Great, thank you, Jack. Bob?
Well, I agree with my fellow panelists regarding public recognition in some form. I think internal and external press releases, for instance, or some sort of public recognition like that helps to keep people motivated, excited to continue to, pursue that public service mission that I think we all have. Where we can empower people to identify ideas, develop those concepts and such. I think that that's really important. I'm fortunate to have a few members of my staff, relatively small staff, but who describe themselves as the me generation. And the me generation is interested in a lot of the innovative technologies that are on the market today or are forthcoming and such. So if we have opportunities to make small R&D types of investments in those tools so that we can test them out, look for opportunities to develop a business case and then present that business case to the various stakeholders that we have internally here, I think that that's awfully meaningful because it shows to those individuals that we're trying to stay out front of the pack, if you will. Rather than change agents, or change masters and some of the other words, I tend to refer to people here in my county as idea scouts. We're looking for those ideas, and not just from IT personnel, but from anyone, throughout the organization. And I didn't coin that phrase. It's something that I adopted a number of years ago that actually came from the 1990s and a professor at Harvard. But those idea scouts exist in our organizations, and if we can help identify who they are, listen to those ideas, and those that have some practical benefits to the people we serve, pursue them, and I think some sort of public recognition again, helps to ensure that we keep thinking about even more ideas in the future. So that's what we tend to do, and I think in terms of incentives for innovation, again, we can't pay money or give cars away and all that sort of thing. But as unfortunate as it is, when local governments experience budget crises, and with our constrained pool of public resources, we run into that frequently, that in itself can be an incentive to innovate.
Great. Thank you, Bob. One of the things, we've got a few more minutes before we turn it over to our great audience here. Several government organizations are creating a Chief Innovation Officer role. What do you think that's about, and how do you think that will work? We'll start with you, Jack.
The government needs to obviously change, and I think driving some of those concepts and ideas. There's a lot of people that really want to do it in the organization, and we've talked a little bit earlier about some of the courage and things like that people have. I don't know. It's sort of a what's the right roadmap, and it really depends on sort of the people, the agency, the processes, and things like that, and also the support that you get within the legislature to do some of those things.
Very good point. Catherine, what are your thoughts on a Chief Innovation Officer?
I think it depends on how it's structured. So I've seen some organizations where that role is going to have, I'll say, authority or at least influence across organizational silos. And if they can help integrate and foster collaboration among departments or among state agencies or among local or state government types, I think that's really powerful, provided they've got, I'll say, the clout to do some enforcement. So if all they're doing is scheming about how people can work together, but it's not tied to budget so that it's actionable, I don't know how effective it can be.
Good point. Bob?
Yeah, I agree with Catherine's last point. If the Chief Innovation Officer does not have the authority to actually implement or institute change, then most likely the duties and responsibilities of this type of position would be collapsed down onto another individual or other individuals in the organization. So I would tend to think that an innovation officer is has those thinking skills to kind of work through all of the nuances of organizational structure and behavior and so on. But I can tell you that from my experience, unless I'm empowered to actually affect change, I may run up against gatekeepers who prevent that from happening.
I think all very good points. One other comment that I'll make that I heard throughout our panelists' responses to questions is how government is risk adverse. And some of the things that you suggested today are, again, how can we become more tolerant of allowing us to make some trials and errors? And then also I think you gave advice today to the audience on ways to lessen that risk, such as a lot of prototypes and pilots and business cases. So I think all of those are excellent advice for, again, all of us, and experience, I think, that we all have been through. Again, thank you for working with us and through our questions today. So with that, Katie, I'm going to turn it back over to you and our audience. And in closing, I would ask, what's next for digital government, and how can we best prepare now?
Stanlis, did you have any thoughts on that? What do you think is coming next for digital government? It's a tough one.
Okay, I'll take a stab. This is Catherine. I think there's so many big next things for digital government. I think everything's going mobile. I think we're going to be working incredibly hard to keep up with the security challenges. I think that with all of these fantastic cloud-based solutions, whether it's Laserfiche, whether it's DocuSign, whether it's Salesforce, that integration across those platforms is going to become more and more critical. And then personally, I'm really loving this push for open data and spatial analytics, because I think it's just incredibly powerful what governments are now sharing with the world and the tools that are available to almost anyone to use that data. So those are mine.
Absolutely. Jack, did you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think, when you start to take a look at some of the challenges sort of moving forward, I mean, we've got many states that even when they start to take a look at the cloud, it's something that sort of scares them a bit. They're not looking to embrace it. I've seen several situations lately where there's major opportunity to change some major financial or procurement or some sort of systems, and the states were very, very reluctant to advance anything related to the cloud. And part of that is the standardization. And, corporations over the years have learned that they really need to standardize some of their processes around some of the best-in-class software out there and try to adjust to using product plain vanilla, or as close to plain vanilla as they can. And that's a necessary step in order to move to a cloud environment. And I've often said that in the corporate world, and I also said it much in the government world, is that we need to start buying by the drink, not by the bottle. And the big systems are basically buying by the bottle. Buying by the drink is more the utilization model and the licensing type of model through a subscription that you would utilize cloud services. Therefore, if you reduce your consumption, you can actually reduce your cost. In the big model that we have right now with data centers and things like that, the states that have that, they have a very, very high fixed cost and a very low variable cost. And doing some things more efficiently actually doesn't long-term reduce their cost.
Wonderful, yeah. I love that analogy, buy by the drink, not by the bottle. Bob, did you have anything to add there?
Well, first, I don't drink, Jack, so I'm not sure what I'm going to get out of it. But regarding the cloud, I agree with what you're saying, specifically about standards and security and access. Those are all topics that we continue to debate internally here in my county, and I'm not sure, what the end is going to look like, but we continue to look at it. But in terms of what I think, is something that we need to keep our lens tuned to is the continued growth of big data as it relates to wearable technologies. We're really close to implementing personal body cameras for our sheriff's deputies, our patrol, our detectives, building inspectors and caseworkers and so on. So wearable technologies, whether it's those body cams, something as simple as a GoPro or more, we're starting to see some interest in Google Glass or technologies like that. Collecting all of that data, storing it in a meaningful, accessible way, securing it, backing it up, protecting it, and so on. I think that that will be a challenge for us. But along with that comes this ongoing debate about privacy rights. And is everything that I do in a public space eligible to be captured, shared as if it were public information? And I think we'll hear more about that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on those topics, and thank you, Sharon, for doing such a great job moderating the conversation. What a wonderful conversation that was. As a reminder to all of our attendees, you guys are muted just to ensure that we can eliminate the background noise. But if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Looks like we've already had several questions come in we're excited about. Well, first of all, Ed mentions, who's buying the drinks after this? He says he's in. But he also had a question relating to the EU. He says, if you look at what's going on in the EU, local government is being driven by the public, driving more input into the decision-making and types of services being delivered. Do you see this gaining any potential in the U.S. in the near to short-term future?
This is Bob, and I guess I would offer, I wouldn't predict that. There are certain communities or parts of the country that are perhaps better versed at including citizen participation in core government decision making, but generally I tend to feel that except for conducting opinion polls and surveys that are really an arm's length type of engagement with citizens, that there will continue to be a reliance, right or wrong, on the elected and appointed officials inside of the organization.
Wonderful. Catherine or Jack, did you have anything to add to that? Any thoughts?
I think Bob said it well.
Concur 100% with Bob.
Awesome.
And that means I have to buy the drinks.
There you go. See, there was one way to turn this around.
Hold you to it. Meredith says, a group of us are currently trying to get the state of Wisconsin to adopt e-signatures, and I'm glad that there are steps that we've started, getting groups to endorse or champion the implementation, finding out ROI, et cetera, to get buy-in. Any advice for her in the right direction to go and how to best achieve this goal?
Well, this is Jack. My suggestion is that you really need to find something that you're going to be able to initiate that will hands down be a success rather quickly and also have somewhat of a material impact. You don't want to select something that's going to be too difficult, but you also don't want to select something that's going to be too easy that people will just say it's a bit of a shoe-in. I think the more contact points it has in the organization and in the constituent base, so the more people touch it and see and feel the benefit of it, the easier it's going to be to advance additional initiatives. So, the Coles Notes version of this is basically be real careful in working to select your first project, get the right people on it, get the right exposure to it, be successful in the process, and the reality is you'll typically start the floodgates kind of opening, because then people are going to want to jump on board and be prepared for that.
Absolutely. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. We have quite a few questions to get through, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. James asks, is there a model or example of return on investment that you use in order to convince higher authorities to spend appropriations on electronic systems? I know, Bob, you have some experience with ROI calculations. Do you want to speak to this first?
Well, I think I can. Depending on the system, depending on what it is we're trying to improve, the so-called model or formula calculation may change, in order to meet the specific needs of that application. But in terms of bill paying, accounts payable, we were able to determine the number of invoices, vouchers, etc., but a payables record that we process annually. We took the lowest paid skilled position in the county in terms of salary to apply to what we think the savings are. We did a quick non-scientific time study to determine what the time savings actually was, and with recent calculations that came out of a finance office, we're looking at saving something like $50,000 a year in this one simple business process. So it's not all that difficult to do if you exclude environmental factors and a lot of other things that tend to get rolled up into cost calculations. We're just looking at it from a very fundamental perspective and not including those types of other fixed costs and things. If we just look at it, number of invoices, how much time has been saved in processing those through this automated process versus manually, multiply all of that time against some rate, and you'll get some savings, calculated pretty quickly.
Wonderful. Catherine, I know that you mentioned that you guys have been doing some ROI calculations recently. Did you have anything to add to that?
Right. I think for every use case, it's going to be a slightly different calculation just because the input costs and the outputs are going to be different. I know for a lot of the companies that are offering, I'll call them cloud-based services, many of them do have ROI calculators, especially for governments. So if you adopt their favorite platform, given your community size, how much savings might you have for that use? And they'll give you what the assumptions are for those calculations. I know DocuSign's been terrific in working with one of our communities, just talking about which services to try to digitize first to have the best buy-in and the best savings so that you can start building those internally. But I've found that the companies provide a ton of support on those calculations.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that's something that vendors definitely are paying attention to and should pay attention to.
Right, they would love to tell you how much money you're going to save. And so if you give them enough information, they would love to help you with the ROI.
Yeah, so it's good to lean on vendors to use the tools that are already available. Jack, did you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I'd probably take a little bit of a different direction on this, is that, and maybe it's more of my bias kind of in the corporate world, but I spent a lot of time talking with C-suite executives, and what I've heard from them is that they're extremely suspect of all of the proposals that they hear about all the money that they're going to save by spending X amount of money. And the challenge is, in very few cases does anybody go back on a post-implementation basis and really validate and determine whether that happened or it didn't happen. I think one of the advantages of kind of moving digital in government and specific to electronic signature is the improvement of the constituent experience and the swiftness in which things can get done. Even if you're just looking at cutting out the time that it takes to mail something from point A to point B. So it allows government to sort of speed the process up because people typically have a bias that government moves pretty slow. So they've got the ability to be able to advance that. And intuitively, you can start to take a look at certain things that over a period of time you won't necessarily need to do anymore. And, again, I've mentioned it a few times, but functions as basic as mailroom. The more you can move digitally, the less you've got to deal with, opening stuff up, scanning it, and doing all of those other things. So I think there's a big advantage to sort of paint the process as it exists right now, paint the process in a more digital environment. And it's a pretty logical decision to kind of move in that direction. And if the agencies involved or whatever just do the right thing around taking out the cost, eventually the cost of all of this will go down. I think a lot of it has to be sold as much on the constituent experience as it is on a cost savings basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Always bringing it back to the customer and their expectations. Absolutely. We've had a couple questions here come in around the cloud and how it relates to digital government. So, how important is the cloud for digital government, and are you interested in pure cloud, hybrid, etc.? What are you looking at? Any thoughts on that? I know it's a topic that's come up in your responses quite a bit here, but we'll take some time to elaborate.
Well, this is Bob. I think maybe to get us started, I would prefer a hybrid approach. Some of our more sensitive data, I don't think myself or some of the stakeholders here in the county would want that out in the cloud. regardless of claims about how secure it is and that access to the data is in fact restricted, only to us and so on. I think there are just some general reservations about doing that. But where there are some applications that in which the data is less sensitive, that I think that it's appropriate to look at that, and we're doing it in a couple of instances. But most of our data, in my case, still resides internally.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for that. Catherine, I know that SIPA does a lot of work with cloud-based systems. Any comments on that?
We almost exclusively, I'll say, support cloud-based systems, but I have to agree with Bob. And so this is a case where we often are working with governments, and I'm working with 2 counties right now to develop them a shared criminal justice information system. And the problem is, I'll say, we've got a solution for them, but trying to make sure that we're complying with all of the federal and state rules around the security of that information and how we're going to handle them, either from what's allowed on the agency computers versus what's allowed by the custom app that lives in the cloud. It's not trivial in terms of trying to figure out a way that the data could live in the cloud safely and not risk disclosing citizen data that's inappropriate. And so we're really sensitive to that for some things, some of the data has to live in a secure server that's controlled on site, that's owned by the entity, and we're trying to be pretty creative about, I'll say, us understanding how the federal and state rules are changing, how the cloud-based apps are changing, because a number of our partners are becoming FedRAMP certified and getting other security permissions at least the federal level, but every bit of citizen data is a little bit different, and we're finding we just have to be pretty careful.
Yeah, it's difficult to sift through, exactly what those regulations are. They're changing relatively frequently, and I know that's a beast of a project to take on. Jack, anything to add there?
Sure. I think one of the challenges in change is also dealing with the legislation that precluded a lot of these concepts and ideas, and I think what sometimes happens is that there's a whole lot of reasons why it can't be done, but the reality is you only need 1 or 2 reasons why it can be done, and to pick the right one and begin to move down the process, and taking a look at the statutes and the legal side of what might need to be changed legislatively in order to be able to enable some of this. I personally was rather shocked when I started to see the differences between state-run data centers and the way they operated and the way they did things versus the corporate environments that I had been used to. And while people were really trying to do the right thing, and in many cases they were, but they were doing it within a construct that was actually somewhat outdated. So I think the level of innovation and the willingness to adopt and to move, and it's not for everything. I mean, the law enforcement component has some huge challenges around advancing into the cloud. So that's certainly not one that I would suggest somebody lead with. But there are many out there, frankly, that would lend themselves very much to this, and those are the ones that are the right ones to start looking at. And in addition to that, then start taking a look at any rules or laws in that might need to be reassessed and reevaluated for change, so that the rollout of this could move a little bit quicker and to spread to other entities.
Wonderful. Yeah, another sort of topic that's come up in the conversations and has been brought up multiple times in the Q&A is there a demand for mobile solutions growing in government, and what role does mobility play in the future of digital government? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
All right, I'll grab this one. Or, do you want to take it?
No, go ahead.
I'll say we're in the process of migrating all of the several hundred websites that we host from an outdated platform to something that's HTML5 enabled so that it's ready for mobile all the time. And we see more and more requests for, I'll say, device agnostic applications. So the governments are telling us, yeah, it needs to work on your computer, it needs to work on your phone, it needs to work on your tablet of whatever operating system. I mean, I think we as citizens and consumers just demand that because everything else we use works that way.
Yeah. It's become an expectation. The world is in our back pocket, right?
It is.
It is, yeah.
Bob, did you have something else to add?
Well, I guess I could just agree with what Catherine had said, that we're seeing tremendous growth in mobile computing. We want access to, all of the various network services and other information, from wherever we happen to be. And that's, historically been associated with our police, but we're seeing it again with building inspectors and caseworkers and so on. So it is growing. That's one of our main growth areas here in the county, is dealing with the variety of mobile computing devices and the needs of the users using those devices. So we're spending a lot of time in that area, and I think we're going to continue to be addressing that for some time.
Catherine, this is Sharon. One of the things that if you ask Gartner or any other research firms, that it is really the mobile experience or the need that is driving cloud services. If you think about it, that makes it easier to serve folks wherever they are and on whatever platform. So actually it's been the mobile movement that's driven the cloud services.
Yeah, the two really do go hand in hand. Jack, any other thoughts on mobility?
No, I mean, it's pretty much been said. Mobile's here to stay. The expectations are going to continue to grow, and I think there's also going to be a tremendous amount of value that's going to be received by cities, states, municipalities, et cetera, on really moving from a paper-based process to basically a mobile platform. I mean, look at simple things like building inspections, right? The ability to be able to properly route them to the most economical way and to get immediate sign-off and find out that, sometimes folks might be spending too much time doing things, or the time allocated to do it is not sufficient, and also the reverse. So I think the whole time management component of mobile is also a big attribute. Now, you're probably going to get some pushback from, let's say, building inspectors, to use that as an example, because it's kind of big brother watching. But the reality is, it's just better controls, better information, and I think much better communications, quite frankly, with the constituent base.
Yes, absolutely. And it looks like we're running short on time here. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. I know there are a couple questions that we didn't get to. You can feel free to email me directly with your questions. My email is Katie, Katie, .Burke, Burke, @Laserfiche, Laserfiche.